Jerry couldn't make it, so I will dive in. So I'm not quite organized, so I'll just bring up the agenda. Make it large enough for me to read. Okay, so it's March 30th, GBOS special meeting regarding Girdwood Bear Aware KMTA grant and GBOS non-profit recreation grants. I call the meeting to order at 7:05 p.m. Let's do roll call and disclosures. Name is Mike Edgington. I'm co-chair of GBOS and land use supervisor. Erin?
I'm Erin Boone, fire department supervisor.
Brianna?
I'm Brianna Sullivan, parks and recreation and cemetery supervisor.
Excellent. And Jerry Fox is unable to make it. He has an excused absence, and I haven't heard from James. Have you, Kyle?
No, I have. I just texted him, so I haven't heard anything.
Okay, so James, if he doesn't turn up, would probably be an unexcused absence. Are there any disclosures?
No.
So not hearing any. I will make a disclosure, and then I'll hand over the chair briefly to Erin, I think, as our, I was going to say oldest, but as our most experienced member of the board. So I have worked with Girdwood Bear Aware, so I have a disclosure to make regarding that. Do you want to rule on that for me, Erin?
I don't see that as you know, anything that should keep you from voting, unless anyone else disagrees. Brianna?
No, I don't find conflict.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to hand the chair back?
I will hand the chair back to you, Mike.
We need a gavel. We need a virtual gavel. Okay, thank you. So I'll go through the notices. Oh, sorry, the agenda approval first. So I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda as written.
I will move to approve the agenda as written.
I'll second.
Okay, we'll do a voice vote. All those in favour?
Aye.
And 0 opposed. Okay, it passes 3-0. Announcements. The public is encouraged to ask questions and provide comment. Please raise your hand and wait to be acknowledged. Please keep your phone muted until called on to talk. To help discussions stay productive, please direct your comments to the board rather than other members of the public, and keep comments focused on the business under discussion and be respectful of everyone's opinions. So move to agenda item 1, Girdwood Bear Aware request for GBOS resolution for KMTA matching grant to fund Wind River Bear Institute work in Girdwood, spring 2021. I don't know if there's anyone on from.
No.
I see there's a guest. Okay. Do we want to move this to the end to see if Elena will join us, or can we address this directly? I'd prefer to move this to the end if no one has objections.
No objections.
No, that's fine.
But I see someone's just joined us. I'm not sure who this is. Oh, actually, Elena's just joining. Looks like everybody is late today.
Perfect. Yeah, Elena's here.
Right, Elena, we were just about to move on from the we were about to postpone or move to the end of the meeting the Bear Aware request. Do you want to jump straight into that now?
Yes, I apologize for my lateness. Yes, I'm just here again, so thanks for taking the time to look at this again. We have submitted a grant request to Kenai Mountain Turnagain Arm Heritage Area Fund in hopes of receiving some more funding to support Wind River Bear Institute returning to Girdwood this summer. And so for that request, we've already secured a full match, and we're hoping to still have an opportunity to ask a couple other places to fill in a little bit more of that funding. But what we're asking GBOS for today is just for a letter of support for that grant request. And that's what you have in front of you.
Okay. What I would like is someone to read this into the record. This probably falls under public safety, but at least that's how I think we approached it last year. So we could do it that way. So that would be James, who isn't attending tonight. So can I have a volunteer to read it into the record?
I'll read it. Sure.
Thanks, Erin. Appreciate it.
Okay. Resolution 2021-05 of the Girdwood Board of Supervisors. Resolution of support for the Kenai Mountains Turnagain Arm Heritage Area Girdwood Bear Aware Grant application. Whereas the community of Girdwood is located in a heavily forested, narrow valley with multiple salmon-bearing streams flowing throughout, making the community prime black bear and brown bear habitat. And whereas over recent years, there have been regular conflicts between bears and humans, usually caused by careless trash handling, attracting bears into residential neighborhoods. And whereas Girdwood Bear Aware GBA is a local grassroots organization with the mission of educating residents and visitors in bear aware practices, particularly around the topic of trash management. And whereas in 2020, GBOS supported a contract for Wind River Bear Institute, WRBI, to spend 2 weeks in Girdwood working with GBA and Alaska Department of Fish and Game, ADF&G, to produce and implement an introductory human-bear conflict reduction plan. And whereas GBA has already secured a portion of the funding required for a second contract with WRBI for the summer of 2021, and whereas GBA has applied for a grant from the Kenai Mountains Turnagain Arm National Heritage Area to contribute to the contract with WRBI for the summer of 2021. And whereas the Girdwood Board of Supervisors, GBOS, appreciates the commitment and long-standing relationship with KMTA and pursuit of our shared goals in community and youth involvement to increase public awareness and appreciation for the natural, historical, and cultural resources in the heritage area. Therefore, the Girdwood Board of Supervisors strongly supports GBA's grant application to KMTA for the GBA WRBI partnership for work in 2021, passed and approved by vote of X this 30th day of March 2021.
Okay, so that acts as a motion. Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Thanks, Brianna. Okay, any discussion? Okay, I don't hear anything from board. Anything? Sorry, Aaron.
Oh, I was
You
going to
were about to say
say,
something?
I'm supportive of it. I saw some of the work that Wind River Bear Institute did last summer, and I think it had a positive effect, and I definitely support him and his dogs coming back.
It seemed there was lots of activity in your part of town, wasn't there?
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
I agree with Erin, and I look forward to another visit from WRBI in our valley for more consistency for everyone and for new people and visitors. I appreciated the interaction I had personally with Elena.
Thank you. Any comments from the public or other members of the community? Okay, I'm also generally supportive. Was there any other comments? Or I saw see a hand. I saw some speech there. Okay, so let's move on to a roll call vote, please, Kyle.
Yes. Aaron Boone,
Yes.
Brianna Sullivan,
Yes.
Mike Edgington.
Yes.
Yep, motion passes 3-0.
Okay, and who will sign? Who will be signing this? Or maybe it'll be James. I see James is joining us. I'll leave it to Margaret to decide who gets to sign the document.
Okay. We're going to take care of
Okay, thank you. So,
it. Go ahead.
Oh, Mike.
Oh,
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks, everybody. Thanks, Aaron and Brianna, for your support, and thanks everybody for all of your support for this. We really appreciate it.
thanks, Elena. We hope it'll be a very
enjoy
quiet
the
year.
rest. Yes, we are. Fingers crossed for a quiet year. All right, enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Okay.
Thanks, Elena.
Thank you, Lena.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 2, which is discuss agenda topics for the MOA GBOS quarterly meeting scheduled for Monday, April 26th at 4 p.m.
I have a question. Will me and Jerry be attending that meeting, or will the new people be in place?
No, you guys, let's see, what is the date on that?
26th, that's the Monday, I believe, isn't it?
It'll be hard to say. I'll have to read the agenda. It depends on when the assembly certifies the election. So they may certify before that, but it just depends. So I'll let you know
Okay.
before that meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I was just having a quick look at the schedule to see if that's maybe somebody else can look at us. I think it's on the election schedule, I believe. I'm going to suggest we make a slight change in order. We had someone who asked to make a public comment, which is Edgar Blatchford, who's a candidate for school board. I would like to move public comment to this point in the meeting, if that's okay with everybody else. The board, we can then have a second public comment at the end if to make sure that anyone who came just for the end would be covered as well.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Do we need to formally vote on that, Margaret? Or are we okay?
I think you'll be fine.
Cool. Okay. So in that case, I'm opening a first round of public comment. So if anyone would like to make public comment, please raise your hand.
Edgar's got his hand raised.
Oh, great. Edgar, would you like to make public comment? Go ahead.
Yes, you can hear me, of course, right?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
Okay, and thank you very much. You know, this is really unusual. I'm allowed to speak early on in the meeting. I've been to a number of community council meetings in the Anchorage Bowl area, but just I know you're very busy, and I am a former mayor of Seward, and I've driven by Girdwood Station numerous times in my 40-some years. But let me just say quickly that I've also served a couple of times as a member of the governor's cabinet. I've been involved in numerous or many budget cuts when I worked for 2 of the governors of this state. I've also been on several very large corporate board of directors, such as ADA and the Alaska Railroad. And so I have lots of experience. I'm a professor at the University of Alaska Anchorage. I am tenured in journalism, and I've taught at UAA since 1995. And I still consider the Kenai Peninsula to be at least a weekend home for myself. I am interested in running for the school board because I am worried about whether the students are going to be prepared to accept the new challenges of this coming century. The world has turned global. We're very connected to other places around the world. A few years ago, and a winner of the Nobel Prize in economics wrote that the world is flat. The world is flat, meaning that the competition comes not from within the classroom or down the street or around the corner. It comes from anybody who has available a laptop and has the opportunity to browse any subject he or she wants. What we need to emphasize is critical thinking, and we need to promote critical thinking, because I think that Alaska is going to be prosperous, but we have to do it almost on our own by recognizing the uniqueness of the place we are at. I think I can help With this, I am an Alaska native. I was born in Nome, delivered by an Eskimo midwife. I ran from the tidal wave, the first tidal wave in 1964 in Seward, although I didn't know the tidal wave was right behind us. We were just trying to get to the explosion of the tank farms right on the shore of Resurrection Bay. I have my PhD is from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. I also have degrees from other institutions. And so, with that kind of an introduction, I hope you do keep me in mind when you vote. If you haven't already voted, please give me a second look. I kind of, and to be honest with you, I kind of hope to surprise a lot of people, because most people say you can't win an election in Anchorage without asking for money. I prefer to be like Senator Proxmire of Wisconsin, who as a college professor won election to the United States Senate spending $200. I don't know whether that was his total campaign budget for some 30 years in the United States Senate, but he spent no more than $200 when he started the campaign, and when he retired, he had never raised a penny. I think that I have the ideas, and the bottom line is not necessarily knowing some of the technical stuff, but the ability to think critically, to analyze, and to come to your own conclusions. And that is what I emphasize. So with that, supervisors, thank you very, very much for allowing me to come into your meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. I should extend the offer to anybody else who wants to make public comment. I'm not seeing anybody else, so we will close the first public comment period, and then we'll have another one at the end in the traditional place.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. So, yeah, the one piece of information I have for this is it looks like the certification is on April the 20th. So it will be before this meeting. So we'll have members of the 2 members of the new board, as well as the three incumbents. Okay, I think we can move to our third item, a more substantial item of business this evening, which is a review of the non-profit recreation grant funding program. Sorry, is there anything more we want to say on the MOA GBOS topic? I don't think I actually officially had any discussion on this. So the idea here is to cover, Kyle, I think this is on the agenda so we can discuss any topics we want to add before the next GBOS meeting.
Correct, it'll be on the agenda at the next meeting.
Yeah. We should just have the opportunity to see if there's anything we should add now. I want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to speak.
Since it's new business, or a business coming up.
Anything from the board? If not, we will move on to item number 3. Okay. So item number 3 is a review of non-profit recreation grant funding program, and we'll look at the application template and the review and evaluation template. So, who would like to lead this, Margaret?
Sure, I can certainly start. I think you all probably remember that we started this conversation a while ago with the recommendation that it might be time to take a look at the grant application and just make sure. I think the intent was to match what we were asking from people to be a bit closer to what we're granting for, to make changes in the application to match what we're actually granting for. And then there were some other conversations as well. So one of the first things that came up was managing the timing of the grant. And so we're looking at adjusting the application date, the review date, and basically by pushing things back into the later part of the summer, we're still accomplishing giving out the grants at the same timeline into the spring and early summer the following year. So The documents that you have in your packet reflect those changes. We have received feedback from Four Valleys, and they say that that would actually be a really positive change for them. I see that Lewis is here with us as well, so if you want to take a look at that and give us some feedback, Lewis, I think that would be great. Other items that came up were sort of more philosophical in nature, but we didn't really have any specific changes that were recommended. They were more kind of, should we include groups that aren't necessarily part of a nonprofit? I did look at that with the grant person with the Muni who helps us. And her recommendation didn't really pertain to that. What she said is to follow the money, you know, to make sure that our grant funds that are coming from the service area property taxes are being distributed properly based on where they're coming from. So I don't really have a recommendation there. We certainly could say that they're not under a nonprofit. I think that it could get a little strange in a hurry. Having things under a nonprofit, I think, does give some additional, I guess, consistency is probably the best word, that they have a track record, they're known to the IRS, they're more functioning as an organization than they might be if they just popped up. That doesn't mean that pop-up organizations couldn't go through Girdwood Inc. if they were approved by Girdwood Inc. or some other nonprofit as well that works in that kind of an umbrella organization. That's exactly what the Trails Committee does for their nonprofit grant applications. So I don't know that there's really a significant change to make there, except maybe in the way that we present that information, that if you're not a nonprofit of your own, you might be able to be covered by an existing umbrella nonprofit. I know that Jerry's suggestion had to do with just making it shorter. I don't really have a solution to that. I would say, as a person who applies for grants on behalf of different organizations here, I don't think that our application is especially onerous. I don't think that the reporting is particularly onerous compared to what I see Kyle go through to get funding back from the RTP grant and from others. I think that would be my main input there. Lewis, did you want to go ahead and say something?
Sure. Back to the non-profit sponsored organizations, I've got a kind of a bigger picture question, and that's who will be responsible for the application submittal, and who will be responsible? I read this document. I didn't see the answer to these questions. Maybe they're in there. Who will be responsible for the year-end reporting, and who will be responsible for the grant agreement itself? And
yeah.
and if there is a statement to that effect, it should be in at least somewhere in the application.
Yeah, I see that as a potential issue as well. Perhaps an opportunity for nobody to really be on first if they're not the actual holder of the nonprofit. I don't know that that's unworkable. I think that it could be designated within the application paperwork. Obviously, from my standpoint, the person that would be, or the entity that would be responsible for that would be the group that is applying for the grant.
In the case of when an entity is being, or when an unincorporated entity is being sponsored by Girdwood Inc., I think the grant arrangement would probably be with Girdwood Inc., wouldn't it? And then there'll be an internal relationship between and the sponsoring organization.
Well, I think all of that is something that they would need to work out with each other. I think as far as for the grants that we apply for under Girdwood Inc., we handle all of the reporting and are the entity that is responsible.
Right, but that's because you are also an entity.
Right, but so for example, a group that might, and I could be wrong about their nonprofit status, but for example, Girdwood Bear Aware could potentially apply for a GBOS nonprofit grant, possibly under Girdwood Inc. But Girdwood Bear Aware would still be the ones that are doing the reporting. I think I have their status correct. I don't think that they.
Yeah, I do know the situation there. So it's an unincorporated entity under the umbrella of Girdwood Inc. So typically, any grants have come through, effectively the contract is signed with Girdwood Inc. and then there's an agreement between Girdwood Inc. and Girdwood Bear Aware to do any work associated with that. But Girdwood Inc. is effectively the contracting entity.
Right. So another way that we've done this is for the tennis committee. With the Friends of the Tennis Courts, we applied for and received grants from various organizations, all under the Girdwood Inc. Umbrella, and the tennis group was responsible for doing the reporting. Right,
but that's an arrangement between Girdwood Inc. and the tennis group.
There was no arrangement between Girdwood Inc. and the tennis group. Yeah, it was just that we were using their nonprofit entity and we hold funds with them.
Okay. So it looks like two different models here. Lewis.
So the answer to my question is still gray.
Yeah.
And it needs to be stated clearly somewhere in writing, not just, oh well, this is what we've done in the past. This is all I've heard so far.
Right. Well, the other thing is that we don't have any indication from Girdwood Inc. that they're necessarily interested in offering this quite as broadly as they might be requested.
Well, I'm not talking about Girdwood Inc. I'm talking about anybody.
Right. But I mean, just overall, we're kind of talking about a model that there may not actually be an interested party in offering their nonprofit status.
So what we're saying is we are, the way I understand it is we offer grants to existing nonprofits, whether they're actually technically 501c3 or not. That's an IRS certification, but they have to be a nonprofit entity. So they'd have to be a nonprofit incorporated entity, or under a nonprofit sponsored organization, which means a nonprofit entity would be acting as the sponsoring organization. So there would be a legal entity which acts as the sponsoring organization. I think that bit's fairly clear to me, that that's who effectively the contract would be with. The question about reporting requirements, we could specify it. Whoever the contract is with, the nonprofit the contract is with, has the reporting requirements, and if they choose to subcontract that, or to have some private arrangement for someone else to take the responsibility, then they can do so. So in the case of Girdwood Bear Aware, which is not a separate entity, it's not incorporated in any way. In that case, the contract would be the grant contract would be with Girdwood Inc. Girdwood Inc. would have a sponsorship arrangement with Girdwood Bear Aware, and it would effectively pass on the responsibility for reporting to Girdwood Bear Aware, but it would be a private arrangement outside of the grant contract itself. So that's one clear model. There's another model where a legal entity exists, but they're not 501c3, so they're using Girdwood Inc. as a way to hold the funding. And in that situation, I see there's a choice, because the contract could be with the other legal entity or not. So there's two different models here. I may not be explaining it very well, but it's clear in my mind, even if I'm not saying it out loud very well. But I think we'd have to have the responsibility would have to pass to a legal and definable entity, which would typically be the nonprofit or the nonprofit sponsoring organization. But there is a circumstance under which it could be the organization underneath the sponsoring nonprofit, if they're a legal entity. That isn't an answer to the question. That's an enumeration of the possibilities, and we have to find a way of identifying which one of those we want to do and then write it down. Lewis.
Perhaps it would help to put both of those possibilities in writing so that it's clearer, so that it's easier to make a choice.
Was it clear to you, Margaret, what I said? No is an acceptable answer.
I guess where I'm falling on this is I feel like we're perhaps talking about making changes that I have not heard the need for. I feel like we're solving a problem that might not exist.
I think you may be right.
I personally don't have any problem sticking with it as it is. I have had some groups that have applied for grants and pulled their applications because, as it turned out, they really weren't well enough formed to be able to take on the responsibility of being assigned public money. And I think it's okay to make it a little bit not difficult, but have it have a few hoops to run through in order to make sure that the groups really are going to be able to find the volunteers or find the wherewithal to make their project come to fruition.
I'm slightly confused about what the current situation is. So I'm looking at the item in the packet, the first page of the nonprofit recreation grant announcement, and there I see we have the phrase nonprofit and nonprofit available for nonprofit and nonprofit, I guess, or nonprofit sponsored organizations, and the nonprofit sponsored organizations is highlighted. Does that mean it's new language, or is that so that language does not currently exist? Okay,
that's correct.
So to clarify, that what we're talking about is if the funding goes to a non-profit sponsored organization, who holds a contract and who has to do the work, and do we specify that, or is the non-profit sponsor, is the sponsoring organization the entity that has to do the work, or we contractually work with?
Yeah, I suppose if you were asking me for my recommendation, it would be to not add that language.
Okay, I think my concern would be there are many organizations which have not done all the work necessary to, and don't want to do all the work necessary to, or don't have the need to go do all the work necessary to become at least a separate 501c3, but still do valuable things. So
Sure.
I think I may have recommended that language originally for that purpose.
I think that it had to do with the language that was in the grant applications having to do with CARES Act and observation that there was not a requirement to be a nonprofit. And that's all true. Although when I went back to look at the actual information that was online about that, I did not find that it was necessarily all that clear that you could operate under some other nonprofit or not be a nonprofit in order to qualify for those. So, I mean, I think that the model that we have is working, and that it's not like we have more money to spend than we can figure out what to do with. So if we wanted to offer grants to more groups and individual or groups and programs, then there might be another way to go about it. I'm not sure that this particular language thing is the barrier there.
Okay. Lewis and anyone else from the board who wants to speak?
So it seems, that was my first thought, to not put in the yellow highlighted phrase nonprofit sponsored organizations, to keep things clean and clear.
See, Erin?
Yeah, I guess I like the potential addition of that nonprofit sponsored organizations because I do appreciate grassroots type efforts to build things for the community, and I feel like we might be discouraging that. But I don't know if if we add that language, I don't know if we need to go into detail about who does the reporting and all that. I don't know if that's necessary.
I think it's probably true that we don't need to go into that level of detail on the grant announcement. But I think whoever holds the contract would have that set of responsibilities, and that may be a case-by-case determination. Kyle.
I guess there's a couple questions, and Margaret, you can probably answer this better because you deal with this quite a bit more than I do. There's an insurance requirement for each grantee, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so, you know, that's where it might get complicated because, you know, the city's very particular about their insurance, their coverages. If you work with children, you have to have a certain rider, all those things. And so, and then there's a lot of detail, I think, at times that a non-profit sponsored organization may not have. And it also kind of trips me up a little bit when you say a non-profit sponsored organization, in the sense that they see themselves as a nonprofit, but they're not officially registered or reporting as a nonprofit, I guess. I know that Girdwood Inc. is taking care of it, but it just seems a little more complicated in that aspect. And I'm one who uses that sort of relationship with Girdwood Inc. quite a bit for our park structure and things along those lines. But yeah, ultimately somebody would be fully responsible for the grant and the reporting and the funds, and also reimbursing the funds if the funds were misused in that aspect. And so I think that's where a nonprofit has all that structure and ability and responsibility lined out as an official nonprofit. So, you know, it may just complicate things with the city. And when you're dealing with government direct grants like this, and we've been doing a nonprofit recreation grant for so long, it may muck it up a little bit. Just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, my experience has been that, at least from the Girdwood Bearware perspective, that it's actually been very straightforward because we're operating as effectively a component of the Girdwood Inc. nonprofit, and you know, we're covered by their insurance when we do certain activities, or we can get event-based insurance via them. We have effectively, you know, funding and reporting work done by them, and we have to do our own part as well. And they are making a decision about whether they trust us to or not when they take on these contracts. So it's actually worked quite well, but that's because Girdwood Inc. is set up that way and is good at doing it. So I don't know that there are other nonprofits that would provide this sponsoring capability. At the moment, there's only one, and they are set up to do exactly what we're looking for here. So I'm kind of with Aaron that I like this language, but it's partly because of personal experience of having gone through this process. Is there anything more we need to talk about on this particular topic, or we can cover all of it and then come back and make decisions?
Great. Well, and I have a feeling that we may not be at a point of making decisions after today's meeting, other than agreeing that we're looking at the timing.
Right. That may be the case.
You know, it's been a protracted conversation, but there hasn't been a lot of activity in between the conversations that we've had as a group. So if we could go back to the supervisor's input page. Yeah, down there. So Brianna, interested in what the grant recipients had to say about the timing and the cycle annually. I don't know, Louis, did you have something that you wanted to provide? We've been seeking input, but haven't necessarily heard a lot from our grantees, so I'm picking on you because you're here.
Right. For the Girdwood Community Club, the the timing is kind of immaterial. The only problem that any kind of timing that has ever happened is a pretty late arrival of the funds, but that's kind of immaterial to the previous year's timing. So I would say no, this timing works for us. Any kind of timing would work. Does that make sense? I mean, it's just kind of immaterial.
Yeah. So Four Valley's input was that they liked the shift because it allowed them to know more about where they were in their financials for the year before trying to figure out where they'll be next year. So, you know, projecting your future year's budget when you're 3 or 4 months into this year seemed like it was a bit of a stretch. As far as when the funds actually get released to the grantees, that certainly was a bigger problem last year than I anticipated. Hopefully we'll get onto a better track here. We do send them all in at one time, all of the grants. And some of it again comes down to insurance actually, because one of the grantees' insurance expires at about the time that the Muni would be looking at it, and so that would gum everything up. So some of it is just kind of random in that regard. Having all the grants go through the Muni system together is a benefit to all of the grantees, though, because it's a total anomaly, and sending 6 of them through independently will not make anything go faster. So we'll do our best to get all the paperwork together and get it out to the Muni quickly. And one of the things that the Muni did manage in the end last year was a more streamlined process, and we're no longer asking for multiple copies of things that we're just going to send electronically. So we've come out of the age of dinosaurs in the last year. It took COVID to break down some of these walls. Brianna, I'm looking at your other comments here. I don't know if you still have some.
I had to see them again today. They were so long ago. And then I guess the very next statement was just interchanging project and program a little bit, and you kind of already did that. Except somewhere I wrote on page 1, but I don't know where page 1 is. It's probably in their application part. Do we keep program and project, and then in the interview process, call it a project a little bit more? And that's just
right
in live interviewing.
Well, and I think some of that also comes down to perspective, and I'm going to use Girdwood Community Club as an example here. Girdwood Community Club is the organization that runs KEUL, and you can help me out with this, Lewis, if I misspeak, but that means that the project, the program, the project is the radio station and some aspects of what it provides. But because we don't even think of the radio station as something other than its own entity, I think we get a little gummed up in whether it's a program or an organization, you know? So anyway, I think some of it just has to do with us thinking a little more broadly about some of these aspects. Did I do okay with that, Lewis?
Yeah, I'm not sure what Brianna's trying to get at here with that differentiation. I mean, an organization can have many projects going on, so
Right.
it's good to have the project listed with the organization name at the. You know, I'm looking at our page 1. I'm looking at your page 1 actually, and it seems pretty clear to me, and I like it the way it's at because it explains clearly the organization and the project, as it's called, the program title. You could change it to project title, or change, but still, it's still you're enumerating where the money's going specifically.
Right. I think those edits look good, and I think number 4 suggested looks good over in the corner or the sidebar. I don't know how, if we're doing this page by page and approving all the red and blue edits.
I'm just looking at your singular suggestion page here. I'm not cruising down through the document.
So it's on the program information page. That sounded like what you were reading.
I think, can I suggest what I think we should do is just is quickly review the comments that we made as supervisors last time, just to refresh everybody's memory, and then go through the document.
Sure.
Yep.
So is there anything else, Brianna, you'd like to point out or bring out in your previous comments, or anything that's occurred to you since?
No.
Okay.
I've got one comment about a paragraph there.
Go ahead, Lewis.
Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She says the grant application process could address programs that are geared to the young or to the elderly. And in this has been occasionally for us a problem with people's expectations about who you provide services to. And so in our application, there's a paragraph that says there should be no age or activity preference in determining access to or funding of recreational programs. And I think that it's ageist to try and delineate specifics of age in your, as she's done, young and old. Period.
Yeah, and I think if I remember that correctly, I think that actually was kind of in response to a conversation that we had also sort of related to CARES Act stuff in general, and just seeing that there were some populations that were not being served well, sort of citywide, and wanting to see if there was a way for us to make sure that we were being responsive if a response was helpful. But I see your point.
Okay, let's move down through the comments. James, is there, reviewing your comments here, is there anything you'd like to add or change or clarify?
No, I don't have anything else to add. I think Margaret lined me out. It's more conceptual. I just opinion-based conceptual ideas, but they were outlined. I don't have anything to add.
Okay, thanks. And Jerry, Aaron and I added comments to the, I think Jerry made just a recommendation that it should be a shorter application, and we've partially covered that, so we should have that in mind as we go through. And then Aaron and I made comments to the document itself. Okay, so let's dive into the documents. So yeah, we have the issue of timing, cost, and whether it extends to non-profit sponsored organizations, which we're going to cover in the, the grant announcement reflects what's in the grant funding program detail. So we can probably go down to the next part. Okay, so this is the information. I think I got confused as to what this page is relative to the rest of it. This is just the first page.
This is like the instruction page that
Right.
grantees get when they look at it so that they're on the right track. So, I mean, really, it just needs to match what the rest of the intent is. I don't think there's anything here that you wouldn't see other places, but this is the first place that we see the change in dates reflected.
Right. What does the first comment make there? Comment 1.
It says, what does this refer to?
Oh, that had to do with the number of packets that was required back in the
that's right.
dinosaur days.
Yep. So that's now moot. Right. Got it.
Yep.
Okay. So page, guess 2, but it looks like 3. So this gets more into the meat of some of the questions we had. So we have a change in timing.
So I think I added some language at the very beginning that explained where the funds come from. They're collected through local tax assessment, property tax assessment within the GVSA. And
okay,
so
and I think this question of where it's performed versus who it benefits is one we need to dive into a bit here.
Mm-hmm.
Which also ties into comment number 2. So I think the previous language didn't really specify, but I think implicitly as things that are located here. And I know one of the questions one of the comments we received from Four Valleys was whether we should target it towards the recipients being being residents of GVSA rather than just the activity being based here. And that's kind of very similar to, that's really the same as the comment number 2. So I think this is a philosophical question, I believe. I don't think there's no question from a sort of legal and governmental point of view that if we're collecting money from the taxpayers and we spend it within the geography of GVSA, but there's nothing to say that we can't spend it on things that are primarily used by people who come into the community from the outside. I mean, we don't choose to, only put out fires for residents and not put out fires for visitors. And the same with roads. We allow anyone to use the roads, etc. So I don't think there's any, unless I'm misunderstanding, I don't think there's any legal reason or a governmental reason why we can't spend based on location of the activity. And I do wonder if putting language in there saying residents of GVSA is somewhat prejudicial. I'm not agree. I see the principle of why we're doing that, but I'm not sure that's the right language or even the right purpose. We could use it as a factor in assessment perhaps, but I don't think it should be a restriction.
Which are you talking about in number 1B? If we added something about benefiting residents of GVSA?
Well, yeah, number 1 in general. Yep. So the section of well, I mean, right. in general, I mean, who benefits? So one of the questions is the comment that we got from Four Valleys, and I think a general question is: should we only be providing funding to activities that benefit residents of GVSA versus activities which are based in and performed here? And I think we can definitely do the latter from a governmental point of view. I think there is a question as to whether we should restrict ourselves or we should say that we're primarily looking to do it to residents versus other property taxpayers, visitors, people who have second homes here, etc., etc., etc. I think that may be too restrictive. I see the motivation for it, but I'm not sure that's the right thing to put into to put in as a criteria, either a requirement for the program or even a criteria for selection or for ranking and selection. Although I'm more sympathetic to the latter.
Yeah, I would agree that because like you said, residents aren't the only taxpayers, so But we do, I mean, we stayed above programs within the Girdwood Valley service area, so.
Yes, within,
Mhm.
because that's the thing that allows us to spend tax money on it.
Yeah.
It's recreation within the service area, or based within the service area. I don't think that prevents us from funding some program where, you know, Four Valleys takes the kids slightly higher up valley and outside the service area, or to Portage or whatever.
Yeah, so I guess I would say we don't want to specifically benefit residents of GVSA, but members of the community, possibly. Is that something?
Well, can I interject right there? So Four Valleys comment was specifically asked or suggested putting right after enable on Roman numeral 1, enable GVSA citizens to participate. And then the following statement says will be specifically used to, so A and B, but I think we're all agreeing we don't need to specify that so much, but Roman numeral 2, B, it says in the community, we could replace community with GVSA to be a little more specific, but not singling it out.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Because that was her other suggested comment.
Mm-hmm.
So is the point under 2 that we use community and then municipality within the same section, and it's not clear that we're talking about Girdwood in the first case?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I think my comment is that I don't think I'm comfortable with putting any language in there that says we're restricting it to, or we're limiting it to citizens of or to residents of GVSA, even though I understand why there's a requirement. We should think about doing it. I think we should think about it and then reject it. Yeah, I mean, in terms of wording of item 2, I think it's perfectly reasonable sense instead of saying the community just use Girdwood or Girdwood Valley or something else. I don't think there's a problem there.
Okay. Yeah, I'm in agreement. Are we kind of working through each of these and coming to a consensus and then moving on?
I think so, yeah, but we're not necessarily performing action at the moment. So I think we can move on from that item. Let's address comment number 3. Yeah, I'm not clear. I'm also not clear why we have limited basis in there. Why section 3 is considered a. I think these are equal to the ones above.
Yeah, we could just delete that purple. Will be considered, : because B says special recreational or one-time special recreational opportunity.
Yeah, I don't know what the purpose of that language is either.
Also, I'm not sure whether, depending on the funding level of funding available, is. So what this language is basically saying is it primarily has to fall into 1 or 2, but under certain circumstances we will consider 3. And I don't think that's the right model. I think they are all valid choices. So 3 is really about one-off programs, either seed money or one-off opportunities. We could just address it that way, just have language in there saying, you know, if it's something new, we'd also fund these, as opposed to things which have an ongoing existence, which is kind of what 1 and maybe 1 and 2 aren't necessarily like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's at the same level as
Yes.
the others, considered at the same level. It's just slightly different. So do you think it should still remain under a number 3 because they are a little bit different, or?
Yeah, I think we just need to find some language to introduce 3. We keep A and B the same.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Margaret, can you think of any language that would introduce topic or would categorize topic 3 that doesn't imply it's less than?
Well, I think maybe we just make it. I think we can come up with something. I'm not going to do it off the top of my head today.
Okay, understood.
Having looked at that clip, I've decided to back up.
Okay, next section, restrictions on funding. I don't actually know what a C19 is.
I stole this language from the Muni website having to do with CARES Act funding. I don't know what they are either, to be honest.
Right. C4 is not typically tax exempt. So C4 includes lobbying organizations and maybe some other social organizations. But I'm wondering if we actually do want to include C4.
I'm fine leaving it as it was originally too.
And this again is where we have the introduction of formally sponsored or be formally sponsored by a qualifying locally based nonprofit. And locally based there is we probably need to specify somewhere what that means. And then the informal associations are not eligible for grants. If we have the language in before that of formally sponsored by a qualifying locally based non-profit, then it seems like the informal association language is probably redundant because we've specified what they either have to be a 501c3 or sponsored by.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. As far as locally based, I mean,
do we kind of cover that in item number 2?
I agree. I would just take out locally based so it's not redundant there because we're already extrapolating on that above.
Because what we're actually saying is it has to be operated in, not based in, etc. So we kind of define locally based by item 2.
Mm-hmm. Serving GVSA too.
Yeah, well, and I'm not exactly sure where we landed after Kyle's input as well on the the other types of organizations and whether we wanted to specify that they could work under the umbrella of another organization.
I think that's something. I think we should go through this document and then address that as a specific.
Okay, because I see this as being kind of fundamental to that question.
It's one of the fundamental questions. Yeah.
So. Yeah.
What I'm going to do is let's go through the rest of the restrictions on funding section, and then I see Lewis has his hands up, so we'll ask Lewis for a comment when we finish the restriction section. So item number 3, the become self-sufficient language. So that seems to be in kind of contrast with a lot of the other things in this document, and it's in contrast to what we're actually doing. So we're providing, in many cases, we're providing funding every year to the same organizations, and I don't think that's against the spirit of the practice. I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, but this language implies that that's not what we intend to do. So I personally think that we can just have the language in there that says there's no guarantees of annual funding, and then just drop the rest.
Yeah, I think that this language may have been added in another revision of the nonprofit grants in a different time.
Right.
When there was pressure on the grantees to become more self-sufficient. And I suppose probably Lewis is our best historian on that as well. But it's always looked strange to me.
Yeah, and it shortens the application.
Yeah. Yay, Jerry.
4 is, or the new 4 is obvious, it's simple. Yeah, item 5, we don't actually have any test in there, do we, to say you have to? It's not like we're providing a matching grant or anything else. We're just providing a grant.
Correct.
So I like the fact it says the intent is, but we don't necessarily enforce it. Yeah. Items 6 and 7. See a comment associated with this, unless that's on the next page. I guess it is on the next page. Yep. So items 6 and 7. What are we actually doing about this? If we put in saying this is a requirement, are we requesting this is part of the reporting process, or? I mean, question 1 is, do we actually want to keep these restrictions? And the question 2 is, how do we know that they're being applied? So I guess question 1 is a policy question for the board, and question 2 is really an administrative question for staff. So let's start with 2.
Are we enforcing it where we are asking for their reporting and it's delivered to you to review?
Okay, so it is being tracked.
We're not
effectively.
enforcing. Well,
right.
One hopes.
If we were doing our job as a board, it would be enforced.
It's available to us.
Okay. And then to
I think
the
as
part
far
1
as
to that.
what the language says, I feel like that may have come directly from the Muni, having to do with what the contract says that you can get grants for.
Okay. Could I give you an action to just verify that, compare it to the contract we use, and if it's the same language, we'll keep it. If it's not, follow the contract language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that contract is actually in this packet as well.
Okay. But we'll just make that an administrative task to make sure they're consistent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I think we've finished that. Yes, we have finished that section. Lewis, you had your hand up, please.
Right, it was the question about 501c4. What is it?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, they can. They're into advocacy and lobbying. And a 501c14 has to have at least 75% of its members as veterans. I don't know what else goes on in those things. I just did a quick look up here online.
Is that 19 or?
Oh, the 14 was it?
Yes, C19 was the actual one I was questioning.
Right. Yeah.
So that's a veterans org, right?
It's not. Yeah.
I'm not actually sure if we want to, if we do want to include the C4. I think that's a question. Do we want to fund a organization which can spend some of its funds on lobbying, and if so, do we want to restrict it so that the money we're providing cannot be spent on that? We probably do need to do that. And again, there may be contractual language in there.
Yeah, it's not just for lobbying. You can promote people running for
there's candidacy as well. Yes,
candidacies. Yeah,
yes, which is something I'm sure the contract says we cannot do, but that doesn't mean C4s don't do other things. So I believe Lions is a C4. I may be wrong, it might be a C6, but I'm kind of posing the question of do we actually want to keep C4 in that list?
I don't know all the details about it to say what I think, but you just mentioned another one, 501c6. Why wouldn't we have that one?
Well, I can't remember what C4 and C6 are sometimes. At least I've seen some organizations fall under either, and you see some inconsistency in what they're used for. But if I remember correctly, C6 is kind of supposed to be a social organization, And I think things like service organizations typically fall under one or other.
C6 is business leagues, chambers of commerce.
Oh, that's it. Sorry, my mistake.
Real estate.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's chambers of commerce, the C6. Yeah. So C4 would be, I believe Lions is C4.
Civic leagues, social welfare organizations, and local associations of employees is a C4.
Yep. But they can spend the money on lobbying and political activity. So as long as we have, if we have contract language in the contract which prohibits the spending of the money on lobbying or political activity, then we probably should have some just comment within this form just to call that out if you're a C4, or we just simply say we don't provide it to C4s.
Yeah, I don't know that we'd want to exclude them, but we would want some language about not spending money on campaigns and that sort of thing. Are there other types of nonprofits? How many are there? Do you know?
Lots. But I think the only ones that exist in this valley are 3, 6, and 4 that I'm aware that currently exist.
Well, I think if we kept it in there, we could just add another Roman numeral stating, because it's restriction listing, restricting the spending on what we were saying.
Yeah.
Political expenses or whatever.
Yeah. Or we could even put just a short statement to the end of that item 1, just to say there are restrictions on 451C4s. There are restrictions on what can be spent on the C contract. And just allow the contract to define that language.
Yep.
Okay. So there was kind of a technical question in there about whether the contract does restrict the activities the money can be spent on for a C4, and I'm pretty certain it does. Can we give that as an action to you, Margaret, to check?
Which contract is that you're talking about?
This is the grant contract.
Yeah, it's included in this packet, so you guys can flip down there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you scroll down, it says this is a sampling of key restrictive parameters.
Yes. Yeah, I just think that one might be one worth calling out, since if we're explicitly calling out C4 as an option.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, let's skip through the rest. Let's just quickly touch on, I don't think there's anything about insurance. Let's just quickly touch on evaluation criteria. I just want to review this very briefly. Any comments? Any comments on the on those criteria?
Yeah, Lewis has got his hand up.
Oh yes, Lewis. Sorry, I'm looking at my other screen.
Yeah, I've got too many in front of me. I'd like to go back to what you can spend the money on just for a second. It's on in the the grant agreement. One of the statements is costs. You cannot spend money for costs associated with lobbying at state, local, or federal levels or other political activities. That's number 10. Number 11, costs of promoting or opposing unionization. And number 12, costs of supporting any religious or anti-religious activities.
Okay, yep. So there is language in the contract as we expected. So rather than pulling that language out and putting it into the restrictions section, I think we should just make a statement that in particular C4, there are activities which C4s can do which are prohibited in the contract. So we should just say, some activities, for example, lobbying and political advocacy, or advocacy for political candidates are prohibited.
Thank you for letting me back up.
Thanks, that was helpful, Liz. I would personally, looking through the evaluation criteria, I'm not a fan of the item 5, the appearance. There's something about it that just makes me, I think I'm having flashbacks to high school or middle school.
That could be on the checklist.
Yeah, that might be a better idea.
I'm not necessarily looking at the same thing that you are. Are you talking about the?
No, I've jumped back. So
neat.
Lewis came back to the previous section, so I'm down in the evaluation section. So the next section down. So we go down one more page. Yeah, the beginning of the next page. Appearance.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Item 5 there. Appearance. I said I'm probably having flashbacks to my youth, but it just strikes me as being kind of a little.
I think I removed the part that said, under no circumstances would handwritten applications be accepted. We've come a long way.
I would say that this is actually pretty common in recreation grants.
Really?
Oh, with the state
Yes.
grant, like we got points knocked down because we gave too much information about our project. So they're looking for people to be concise and to the point on their answers. So,
well, maybe that's the point then. I would replace it then with something that just says, is necessary, sufficient, and not excessive information provided. I think the idea of neatness just seems like a kind of unnecessary. If the purpose is basically to make sure that the information is relevant, then we should probably say so.
yeah, I think this was a response to applications they got in the early years of this process. But since then, we've pretty much every application we've gotten is pretty professional. Or
Yeah,
at least
Yes.
many of us can't remember how to write with hands.
technology helps you.
I agree with that neat probably isn't the right word, but maybe complete and
Complete, concise, and relevant.
Yeah, because I do appreciate. I just in seeing any applications, it's like you can tell if someone took the time to do it and didn't just rush through it in 10 minutes. And so I'm thinking that's what they were getting at with neat, but we can say it differently.
Yeah, I would actually. I'm going to make a concrete suggestion. I think we should just have is the application complete, concise, and relevant, and it must be less than 6 pages.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, and then I think we addressed checklist. Do we take out there must be 35 copies printed?
Yes,
Yep.
we're back down from 35, unless they make us go back to something crazy.
Yep. And it can be emailed?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So I think we still have one substantive discussion to try and resolve, which is do we want to open this to organizations which are sponsored by non-profits versus non-profits in their own right, or more specifically C 501c3s. So really the key thing is under the restriction section, item 1. Do we want to include that second statement? So or be formally sponsored by a qualifying locally based non-profit. So I understand Kyle's concerns and appreciate those. However, in my experience, we do have, I wouldn't say unique, but we have a special entity in Girdwood Inc. that basically opens up which provides a sort of low barrier for entry to providing effectively non-profit capability to a number of local organizations. And I think it would be good to allow those to apply as well as pre-existing 501c3s, etc. So I am in favor of this change.
I don't know if we can actually require that it be a locally based nonprofit. I don't know that there are others out there that are able to perform that way, but I mean, the model of Girdwood Inc. is kind of the Alaska Community Foundation, so there may be.
That's a good point. The locally based we could definitely take out because we have item number 2 that says the organization must have been in operation since.
What was that last part you said, Mike, about?
Margaret's comment was we perhaps can't put must be formally sponsored by a qualifying locally based non-profit. We do have item number 2, which says the organization itself must have been in operation in the GVSA since at least January the 1st. So item number 2 talks about the organization, which is not necessarily the qualifying non-profit. I think we can say at least Alaskan non-profit for item number 1, but not necessarily locally based. But the organization itself should have been operating in GVSA for at least, in this case, 2 years.
Yeah.
Correct. And the organization is recognized by the state of Alaska by a qualifying Alaska-based nonprofit.
Yeah, so or be formally so that it's part 1, second phrase in red. So we change that to be or be formally sponsored by a qualifying Alaskan-based nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I'm in general supportive of that change, allowing organizations that are sponsored by Alaskan-based nonprofits. The organization will have to do some legwork initially to make that connection with a nonprofit. So it's not like they're just, they have no, I don't know, they're just coming in off with a wild hair idea, and not having to do any legwork. So I feel like that will weed out the potentially ones that might not be so beneficial for the community or not have local support.
Okay. So we have a choice at this point. We can either actually try and make a decision tonight on this document, or we can sort of choose tonight as being our discussion, and then have Margaret go away and make the edits we've requested, and resolve a couple of administrative issues, and then vote to accept the changes at our next GBOS meeting. I would probably recommend the latter, but if anyone wants to propose a motion to make changes and accept changes now, I would obviously entertain that.
I think if I could, I would recommend that you might vote officially on the change in dates, because if we weren't changing those dates, then I would need to start letting people know that the grant cycle would be opening here.
That's a great idea.
Soon.
Yes. Yeah, that's a very good idea.
But I feel like, as far as the document that we're looking at and the changes that we might want to make, I would like to send some drafts around and continue to work on this more collaboratively, and then come up with something more comprehensive, say in April.
Okay, so in that case, I would entertain a motion that we postpone the 2022 non-profit recreation grant funding cycle to a August-September application period rather than the May-June application period this year.
So moved.
Do we hear a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion on that?
Are we, you said August, September timeframe, but do we need to specify the date, the due date?
We can do so. So let's say, yeah, so we can maybe someone can offer an amendment to do exactly that, since we have a seconded motion.
I'll offer an amendment to change the due date for the application to, what is it, September
17.
17th. September 17th.
Do we hear a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion on the amendment? Not hearing any. Let's do a roll call vote on the amendment. So the amendment is that the motion will now specify that we change the deadline from June the 18th to September the 18th, 2021 for at least the 22 cycle. Can Carl or Margaret, can you do the roll call, please, for us?
Sure, I can. Brianna?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
And James?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're back to the main motion. Any further discussion on the main motion? Okay, or from the public? I'm not seeing any. So, Margaret, can you do a roll call on the main motion?
Sure, Brianna?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Right. So, at least for the for the instructions, I think we've reviewed this. We've come up with a number of suggested changes. Some of them require Margaret just to go back and do a little bit of research on it. So, if you bring back those changes in the next UBOS meeting, we can vote on that. I think we should also review the application and see if we have any changes we want to make to the application form itself, as well as the instructions. So can we move down to the application form?
Kyle, can you scroll us down a little bit?
I think it's page 12 onwards.
Page 12.
And we can just look at the pieces in red. So as we go through, any comments on the suggested changes? This page. Okay, so let's look at the next page. We have a project program funding. Okay, so item number 4. I don't know where the comment came from. I mean, I think a brief history is completely acceptable. I personally don't think there's any. I may have even made that comment, but I don't see any need to delete that item. Does anyone else have comments on that?
Yeah, Lewis here. I think it should say it's. I think it's nice to know a little bit about the past history of organizations.
Yep, I agree. Okay.
Oh, I had a comment.
Sure, Aaron.
Number 3. So there's a mixture of project and program. I just want to make sure that they're used appropriately, or if we need to change some of them.
Yeah, I think we're missing a couple. I think even at the very top of the page, there was still program instead of project. I think the overall goal here is to make it project and to say that we're funding projects.
Okay. So just again,
So
Margaret.
you will
take
all
an
need
item
to be on the lookout for that as well. But yeah, I'll do my best to search it all up and make sure that we get them all.
At least all the ones that are correctly spelled, we should change.
Maybe. I love myself a typo. Also on number 3, though, I think that's new language that's in blue, and we kind of talked about this one earlier. Is there an unmet need or population that the program project, whichever one it turns out to be, intended to serve?
I think that's a good question.
Okay, so you like that one?
Yeah,
I think that is a better attempt at figuring this out than the one that was more age-based.
Yes.
I agree. And with the phrase intend, or the root word intend.
Yep. Great.
Okay, let's move on to the next page. So we had a number of questions on 7 and 8, or a number of thoughts. I actually like the suggestion in the comments for item number 7 of just participants and volunteers, and how many local participants and local volunteers, and then remove some of the hours requirements or questions.
Louis, how does that strike you? If I could.
We've had an interesting conversation about that. I think I remember one organization decided that they had 12,000 hours of volunteer time in a year, and it's like, I had no idea how they came up with that, other than, or it was participants, and it's like they multiplied participants, and it's kind of, it doesn't, it's one of those things you can make anything you want to out of if you were going to fill in numbers. So I don't know. That's my comment. I don't know.
So it sounds like you see room for improvement with it, though. So we should keep looking at it.
Yeah, and I haven't thought seriously about it. I like down in 11, I like the number of volunteers and the volunteer hours. That's a real, that's an interesting one there. But number 7, I'm not sure how to deal with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think 7 and 11 are somewhat redundant with each other. I think we're really interested about not the organization as a whole, but the part of the organization. When it's a organization which isn't solely based here, we're interested in the component that's here. We're not really interested in the other more general information. So I think we can collapse them both into a single question, and it probably is about how many people are served by the program, either as participants or volunteers. And I would collapse them both down into one question.
Yeah, and I'm not sure we can say locally based, like the comment says, because that might be, I mean, that's like saying residents of Girdwood, right?
I think whether we get the information or not, we can ask for the information. What we're not doing is saying it's an entry criteria. That was the discussion we had beforehand, was whether this is a requirement for the program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. We're gathering information.
Yep.
I have a couple thoughts with those. I'm just thinking of Art Camp. They broke it down to say how many Anchorage residents were able to participate and how many Girdwood residents, because they can find that pretty easily. But then when number 7 says this program, and if something like Challenge says, well, we as Challenge serve hundreds of people, but this one project is not going to serve X amount of people, or Four Valleys can multiply their numbers because there's only a few hundred kids in this community, but if all of them do 5 sports, then that multiplies it by 5 and they call it a program. But we're trying to make this a project. So 7 could be interpreted either of those ways for each organization.
Yeah, my recommendation would be to basically scrap question 7 completely, and have number 11 basically just capture the information for the program of interest, not the organization as a whole. And I think there's to me, I don't think the hours is that interesting. I think it's the number of people the number of individuals which is more interesting. But again, I'm open to other suggestions. So
no,
that's what.
I don't have anything different. I think that makes sense to me.
Okay.
Number 8, I was going to say the comment. Yeah, whenever I see this registered versus non-registered individuals, that doesn't really mean much to me. So I think simplifying it into just that, like a single question, would be good.
Like, are they scholarshiped individuals if they're non-registered? No.
I think the way I use the answer to this question is to get a sense of, is this something which has kind of a high barrier to entry, and tying that to what the purpose is. So if the purpose is to provide scholarships, maybe it's a relatively expensive program, but there are, the purpose of the funding is to provide scholarships to people where fees are a barrier to entry. But I'm getting a sense of whether this is, one extreme, whether you just require a radio to listen to it, to experience the service, or at the other end you have to, you have to buy a whole bunch of specialist equipment and pay high registration fees. It just gives a sense of what burden the program puts on the recipient. Financial burden it puts on the recipient, and then that plus the purpose. If the purpose is scholarship, then you can read it in a certain way. So I find this useful, but I agree the distinction between registered and non-registered, I don't think matters. I think a more straightforward question of what's the cost to participants. And then 9 kind of approaches that from a slightly different point of view. Yeah, Lewis, please.
Looking at 7 and 11, we've, as far as our program goes, the radio station, 11 is something that we can't really know. The numbers aren't, half that question, non-registered participants, unknown. Those are the listeners. What's more relevant to us is the volunteers and the hours that they put in. Our volunteers are putting in hours every week, lots of hours every week, and I think that's 52 weeks out of the year. That in itself, I think, is relevant. And as far as number 8 goes, that shouldn't even be there.
Yeah, I find it useful. I think it does give a sense of some of the financial barrier to entry for a program, and then that plus the purpose of the funding, whether it be to enhance some aspect of the program or whether it's a scholarship program. It helps interpret what the sort of context is of the program.
Right. I'll take that back. Thank you.
Okay. So I think the recommendation here is to combine 7 and 11, and then 8 just have a simple question of what the cost is for participants.
And do you want to clarify in number 10 then, number of paid program staff related to this project?
Why do we actually have that at all?
Or removed it?
I mean,
I think getting an idea of the size of the organization. Yeah, I don't.
Personally, I don't use that information, and I don't know that it's. We're really, if we're focusing on a specific project, then this information is about the the broader organization, and perhaps isn't relevant. We could make it specific to this project of what's the, what are the paid program staff for this project. But I don't think I'd be using the information at all. So personally, I don't see it as useful, but other people may do.
I guess, like Margaret said, it does give you an idea of the size of the organization, potentially. I don't know that it would play into any decisions you would make, but it's just like more information about the organization, I guess.
Right, and it could fluctuate. Like this past year with COVID, they had to have a higher ratio of staff because there were just less children at something like art camp. The numbers went down, and then they would change each year, or like smaller pods of people.
Yeah, even after hearing your comments, I'm still not sure I see any value in it. So I would be okay if it was removed, but again, I'm happy to take the general consensus here. Because we do ask for budgeting information, which gives us some sense as well.
Right, you have general staff salary budget.
Yep.
So you can see if somebody is relatively staff heavy, I suppose.
Was that a new hand, Lewis?
No.
Old hand.
Okay. Any other comments on this section of the application? I think we reviewed the budget and the budget statements and didn't see any issues there. Okay.
This has to do with the reviewing, so it just needs to match.
Yep.
What we're doing.
Okay.
So I think review.
So that's
of this
pretty much a
probably,
copy of above. Yeah.
A lot of it is the copy of what's above. You might want to say that you have other areas of interest.
I was gonna. I think this is pretty much all replication of what's above, isn't it?
Yep.
Yep. So let's move to the evaluation sheets. Any comments on these?
Did we change that evaluation question? Evaluate the criteria?
Number 2?
Yeah, I don't remember talking about it earlier.
Is it
I think there was a question about what criteria are used to evaluate the success of the program.
But there were no comments on it above?
Just going back to check. Yeah, there's no comments on that. So I think we can keep that as is.
Okay.
In our evaluation of the application. And looking at the comments on item 9 and item 10, I actually generally agree with these. I think facilities are adequate for purported use is a little weird. I suspect it's there just in case something comes through that's really egregious. But it's probably more of a check mark than, pass fail.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And number 10, I'm never sure how to, I kind of oscillate between two positions of, are we saying For number 10, are we saying if it's essential that they get the funding, we should prioritize the ask, or are we saying that there's a risk that they won't be able to succeed, so we should penalize them because there's a risk it won't be successful because they're not self-funding? I'm never sure what to. Number 10, I interpret a certain way, but it's actually ambiguous.
Yeah, I have the same struggle, and I lean towards, like, we want them to be able to continue without our funding. We want to make sure that they're like a reliable organization, right? But we should clarify that, I think, because it could go either way.
Yeah, I feel like this probably also comes from that time when the idea was that the funding was more finite, that it was get programs off the ground rather than a sustaining sort of a situation, or at least long term. So I don't know exactly what this question is moving toward either, but I do think that something that's an important aspect of this is that what people ask for in their original application and what they get in the long run are typically not the same, because you guys average things in the course of all of that. So, I mean, I feel like that's already handled in the various different statements about how funding isn't guaranteed, and you know, I haven't yet applied for a grant where I really expected to get all of what I asked for. That's kind of, for a while there was sort of a benefit for our grantees to ask for a bunch more than they really needed because they knew that they would be scaled back. So the more you ask for, you know, if it's percentage wise, then the more likely you are to get someplace that you wanted to be. Whereas if you were more straightforward in your approach, you would ask for what you really needed and you might get scaled back further than you can handle. So, I mean, all of that opens up different areas that we probably don't want to address right now, but there are definitely different psychologies to applying for these grants.
All right. Thank you, Margaret. I was going to say that it helped me a little bit, and I only have done this 1 year, but what was I going to say? I think they had to disclose what other grants they had applied for or had been awarded, and if they applied to this particular project. But it helped me when I was allocating who got what on my little sheet to then compare with every other board member.
Are you saying this question helped, or just seeing what other grants they were applying for?
Other grants they were applying for. I get. So this score, though, we had to give our scores to Margaret and then tally that to come up with a total. And this scoring sheet, number 10, is reflected on those other questions throughout. Right? I think.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if maybe what we want to know in this question is, you know, what does this organization have multiple funding sources? Does it seem diversified?
So it's kind of a sustainability question.
Mm-hmm.
Sustainability, but I think
potentially resilience. Right.
So I think there's two aspects for it, depending on what type of organization it is and what the purpose of the funding is. So if they're coming in looking for seed money, then we're not measuring it on, we're measuring it on potential, not on necessarily on long-term sustainability and potential. If they're looking for continuation funding or something close to continuation funding, then we're looking at well, we're kind of looking at something similar. We're looking at sustainability, but with a slightly different lens. But yeah, I think it needs to be rephrased. So it's really a sustainability and resilience question, isn't it?
Yeah. So maybe the question should be, is this program sustainable and resilient? Then in 5 years, we'll wonder what that meant.
Yeah. Well, we can go back to the recording of the YouTube discussion. Okay, do we have some actionable item from this, Margaret, do you feel, from item 10?
I will pitch some ideas to you and maybe we'll hone in on it.
Okay. I think we're done. Right, okay, yep. Then it's just the rest of the evaluation form, which we've seen. Okay. And then we have the contract, which we're not going to go through. That's just there for reference.
So,
okay. Sorry, Margaret.
no, I just would offer that the very sweet grants lady did say that if we started messing with the contract, that we could expect for it to go through legal review, which would probably be just fine, but it would take some time. So my recommendation right now is that we roll forward and just make sure that our expectations match what is in the contract. She did note that there's a lot in the contract that is boilerplate that really doesn't apply to the types of grants that we give.
80% of the contract looks like every other contract I've seen from the Muni.
Exactly, including the police one.
Yep.
So you can see a lot of crossover to that. But anyway, at some point that might be something that we want to do. I would say we should do it sometime when we have plenty of time. And I would recommend that people read the contract, because you will probably pick something up in there that I have missed. And it would be good to have the benefit of that information as we look at the language for the applications again.
Yep. Okay. Lewis, your hand up.
Yeah,
Real
I
virtual.
see the cover letter to the contract has some changes. I didn't know if there were something that you needed to go over or that Margaret wanted to go over.
I think cover letter was just the date and the issue about IRS non-profit status, or
right.
Actually, there is 501c3 / whatever status.
Yeah, they're not even enumerated as 501s, just as a copy of your IRS nonprofit status or formal sponsor's IRS nonprofit letter.
Yeah, right. It wouldn't need to be enumerated here because we have it enumerated elsewhere. But the this language would just reflect the decision we make elsewhere. Okay, I think we've gone through. We've made one decision because we can. This is a special meeting, so we've made one decision on pushing back the date to the fall this year, and we can obviously formalize that when we change the language overall. And then we have a number of specific edits and changes which Margaret will make, and then bring it to us at probably the next GBOS meeting, maybe the GBOS meeting after that. But definitely within I would say the April or May, depending on how the work goes. Is it likely we'll have this ready for the April meeting, Margaret?
I think so.
Okay, so we should expect it to be on the agenda there as old business, and then we will probably just do a brief review and review the primary salient points, and then vote. Okay, is there anything else anyone would like to discuss on the non-profit grants? That is board members, staff, or public. Okay, I think we've covered, yes, we've covered the program, goals, the application, and the evaluation. Okay, so I will open up for any final public comment. Persons offering public comment must state their full name and address. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per person and must be on subject not listed on the agenda. Any comments from the public or board members acting in their non-board member capacity? Okay, not hearing any, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. I'd like to thank Margaret in particular for all the work on this document and process and keeping us focused.
Thanks, Margaret. I make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second. Thank you very much, Margaret. And Mike,
Oh, you bet.
Aaron,
Thank you all for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
and James.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.
night.
Thank you, Louis.
Bye.